Welcome, everyone. We have lots of people joining, and we're going to give it a minute so that folks can enter into the Zoom room. As you join us today, if you are willing and able, we love to have you put your name, location, organization into the chat. It's always a wonderful time for us to gather and to learn who each other are. We are going to ask that you keep your mics muted, and you're welcome to keep your camera on or off, whatever makes you most comfortable as we settle in to this gathering for the next hour. So just going to give it another minute or two to be sure everyone can get settled in. And again, feel free to use the chat to make comments, ask questions. We will keep a record of all of that, and anything that we can't get to in this hour together, we can be in conversation, hopefully forevermore, as we've come together on this April 23rd, 2025. So again, welcome. And I think we'll go ahead and begin. So my name is Susanna Tuttle. I serve as the Eco Justice Connection Director at the North Carolina Council of Churches. And I'm here on behalf of our 38-member governing board, along with our full staff and everyone who is a member of the 19 denominations that comprise the North Carolina Council of Churches. It is a true honor to be able to host this important dialogue today, and we are very, very grateful for your presence. Founded in 1935 to address racial inequality, we are honoring our 90th anniversary this year as we continue our mission to enable denominations, congregations, and people of faith to impact our state on issues such as economic justice and development, human well-being, equality and compassion, and peace. While the Council represents 19 Christian denominations, we have always been committed to interfaith partnerships, and our vision is for all people of faith and conscience, leading the social justice movement based in love to create equitable, compassionate, and thriving communities for all. So again, so much gratitude for this opportunity to host today, and I will pass it over to Rabbi Scott to open us in prayer.
Thank you so much, Susanna. Good afternoon, good morning, and welcome everybody. And thank you for joining us on this important commemoration and program. We really are grateful to have you here today. My name is Rabbi Scott Klein. I am privileged to serve as the Nechama's Jewish education and engagement consultant. And I invite everybody to join me in prayer. Eternal God, source of compassion and justice, on this sacred day of Yom HaShoah, we gather with hearts both broken and resolute, united in solemn remembrance. We are brought together by the vital work of Nechama and the North Carolina Council of Churches, organizations dedicated to healing, understanding, and building bridges within our communities. We stand alongside everybody together today to remember the 6 million souls, our kin, were systematically murdered during the Holocaust. Their voices, though silenced by cruelty, echo in our memories and call us to bear witness to their suffering. We recall the vibrant lives that were extinguished, the scholars, the artists, the parents, and the children, each a universe lost to the abyss of hatred. We acknowledge the depths of human depravity that allowed such horror to unfold, and we commit ourselves together to understanding the forces that can lead to such darkness. Yet, amidst the pain, we also recognize the enduring strength of the human spirit. We honor the survivors, like Renée Fink, whose powerful testimony we will soon hear. Individuals who carry the weight of their experiences and yet choose to share their stories, offering us profound lessons in resilience and in hope. May their courage ignite within us a steadfast determination to build a world free from bigotry and oppression. Lord, grant us wisdom to learn from the past, empathy to understand the present, and courage to shape a future where the sanctity of every life is upheld. May the memories of those who perished be not in vain, but a constant reminder of our shared responsibility as individuals and as a community, supported by organizations like Nakama and the North Carolina Council of Churches, to safeguard humanity and to actively work toward building a world filled with justice, compassion, and peace. Amen. And please join me in a moment of silent reflection as we individually honor the memory of those who are lost and contemplate the lessons of the Shoah.
Thank you, Scott, for those opening remarks and for that opening prayer. I'm Stefan Klein. I'm the CEO of Nakama Jewish Response to Disaster. And I want to thank the North Carolina Council of Churches for convening this program with us and for Susanna for leading us off. Nakama is a national organization based in the Twin Cities of Minnesota that provides response and recovery in the aftermath of natural disasters. We're now working in Buncombe and Henderson counties in Western North Carolina and have been there since October 6th, recruiting volunteers locally from around North Carolina and across the country. And we've brought hundreds to our work sites to clean up debris, muck and gut houses, and rebuild them. As we frame our work, Nakama has three overarching priorities: to provide comfort, the English translation of the Hebrew word nakama, and healing to the communities shattered by disaster. This is the direct provision of services that we engage in. We build the identity and engagement of volunteers of all faiths and none interested in tikkun olam, the value and need to repair the world. And we humanize Jews and Judaism in regions impacted by natural disasters. This last priority brings us to you today. You all know that there's been a huge uptick in anti-Semitism in recent years. In fact, this week, ADL released its annual report showing that there was a 5% increase in anti-Semitic incidents in 2024 compared to 2023, including assaults, harassment, and vandalism. And researchers counted 9,354 incidents of these acts in 2024. North Carolina, of course, is not immune from the national trends, and there was a 16% rise in anti-Semitism events here compared to 2023. And there was also a huge rise in online hate, particularly in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, with a significant amount targeting Jews. At Nakama, we know that through our direct work, we're helping clients recovered from trauma caused by hurricanes and other natural disasters. Virtually none of our clients are Jewish, and we know that often we are the first Jews that they may have met. It is through programs like this one that we wanted to more actively meet different parts of the communities in which we're working. And Yom HaShoah, the holiday commemorating the Holocaust, provides this opportunity. For many of us in the Jewish community, this is deeply personal in recent history. For me, each time I walk into this home office, on one side of my door, I see a picture of my maternal grandfather's music store in Vienna that was confiscated by the Nazis in 1938. And on the other side of the wall, I see a picture of my Polish great-great-grandfather taken in 1921 in Lodz. He's surrounded by 6 of his grandchildren. 4 of those kids, along with their parents, were slaughtered in the Holocaust. My grandmother had emigrated here in 1929. In a few minutes, we'll hear from Renée Fink, a survivor of some of those darkest years in human history. But first, I'm so pleased to introduce Kathy Manning to you. You know Representative Manning as the brilliant and capable Congresswoman from North Carolina's 6th Congressional District, which was based in Greensboro. During her 2 terms, Representative Manning served on the Foreign Affairs and the Education and Workforce Committees and became the lead Democrat on the House Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism. Before she came to Congress, Representative Manning was and is a hugely important leader in the national Jewish community and served in many roles, including as chair of the Jewish Federations of North America. I got to know her well as I staffed her on many public policy initiatives there, and we're so pleased to have Kathy join us today. Kathy?
Thank you so much, Stefan, for that beautiful introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank the North Carolina Organization of Churches and Nechama for holding this Yom HaShoah commemoration, and for the important work you all do, building bridges among communities by working together on relief work that is so desperately needed. I know the work that you all have done in Western North Carolina has benefited so many people who were devastated by Hurricane Helene, and I had the opportunity to see exactly what happened to Western North Carolina when I was still in office last year. I'd like to thank you all, everybody who's on this Zoom, for taking the time to come together to commemorate one of the most horrific times in history, the murder of 6 million European Jews, including more than 1 million children, by the Nazis and their collaborators in a plan to eliminate the Jewish people from all of Europe during World War II. The tragic event known as the Holocaust or the Shoah was the culmination of more than 2,500 years of anti-Semitism. From the Crusades to the expulsion of Jews from England and Belgium and France, to the Spanish Inquisition, to the pogroms in Russia, to the Holocaust, Jews have been subjected to conspiracy theories that blame them for whatever ills a society has faced. Anti-Semitism must be taken seriously because hatred that begins with Jews never ends there. I wish I could say that the nightmare of the Holocaust has taught the world not just the dangers of anti-Semitism, but the dangers of treating any group of people as something less than human. But sadly, that is not the case. As a member of Congress, I had the privilege of leading the U.S. House of Representatives bipartisan task force to combat anti-Semitism, and it was my responsibility to bring attention to the frightening rise of anti-Semitism on both sides of the aisle that has been taking place for more than a decade. From the neo-Nazi marchers in Charlottesville shouting, "Jews will not replace us," to the murder of Jews worshiping at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, to the horrific attack by Hamas on Israel, where 1,200 Jews were mutilated, burned, and slaughtered. That was October 7th, 2023. And more than 250 people were taken hostage, many of whom are still hostage, to the shocking Jew hatred expressed at university protests across the country following that horrific Hamas attack. Jews are once again being vilified simply for being Jews. And as Stefan just mentioned, the Anti-Defamation League, which is one of the most respected nonprofit organizations in the country, which is dedicated to assessing and combating anti-Semitism, they recently released their 2024 anti-Semitism report, which found that anti-Semitism continues to increase across our country. And as Stefan mentioned, it found that Jews in America faced more than 9,000 incidents of anti-Semitic assault, harassment, and vandalism across the United States in 2024. That averaged to more than 25 anti-Jewish incidents every day, with a 16% increase right here in North Carolina. And sadly, the FBI statistics similarly reflect a continuing rise in anti-Semitism. And reports by the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum have found that a vast majority of students across our country know absolutely nothing about the Holocaust. So how do we rectify this appalling rise in anti-Semitism? There are many important steps that our federal government should take, and that is an area that I worked on tirelessly during my time in Congress. But there are also steps we can take right here in North Carolina or wherever you may live while you're watching this Zoom. And I'd like to touch on two that can have a great impact. First, We must have robust education about the history and the dangers of anti-Semitism and the values that the Jewish people hold. We do that to some extent in North Carolina with mandatory Holocaust education, but clearly we must enhance and expand that education to combat the lack of information and understanding that is allowing anti-Semitism in this state to grow. Second, we must work to build bridges of friendship and understanding between communities and among people. And that is what Nechama is attempting to do. And I want to thank all of you who participate in this very important work. I come from a community where there have been efforts to build friendship and understanding across religious, racial, socioeconomic, and other potentially divisive lines for many years. And I believe we in Greensboro have had good success. On this Yom HaShoah, my wish is that we can use the example of the Holocaust as a warning of what can happen when groups of people are treated as other, as less than human, as unworthy of respect and dignity, and are blamed for whatever is wrong with a society. And most important, what can happen when people of goodwill stand silently by and let those things happen? Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy, for your powerful words and for your continued leadership in standing up against anti-Semitism and hate in all its forms. Your dedication to justice and your advocacy for our community means so much, especially at a time when voices like yours are needed more than ever. It's really an honor to follow you and to continue this important conversation as we welcome our really distinguished guest, Renée Fink. My name is Tzlil McDonald, and I serve as the director of Nechama's Combating Anti-Semitism project. Nechama disaster relief work extends beyond immediate recovery by promoting positive community relations and combating anti-Semitism. Through our core value of Tikkun Olam, we provide disaster response without religious bias, offering a visible Jewish presence in communities that often have limited exposure to Jewish life. Let me begin by asking a question. How many of you can say you have met a Holocaust survivor? Renée's story is one you will not forget. It's a story of courage, resistance, and the incredible kindness of ordinary people in 1940s Holland. It's qualities that remain just as essential today. To help frame our interview, we'll begin with a short clip from a documentary Renée recorded for the Center of Holocaust, Genocide, Human Rights Education of North Carolina. Shlomo will go ahead and share the video now, and we'll also post link to the full documentary in the chat that I really encourage you to watch in full later. Thank you, Shlomo.
Can we hear or see? No, of course. Give me 1 second. 1 second. Okay. Okay. Can we see the screen?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, great. I'm going to press play. Just a reminder, if the audio is low for you, you can raise the volume on your own device, and then you can lower it back when we're at the conversation.
I was born in December of 1937 in Scheveningen, Holland, also known as the Netherlands. My parents and my entire family was German. They were all from Breslau, Germany, which today, in the 21st century, is Poland. And we lived in Scheveningen, which is a beautiful seaside town right by The Hague, until all the Jewish aliens were moved inland. They were not trusted to be on coastal areas for, I guess, purposes of espionage. My family was forced by the Germans to move inland from Scheveningen, and we moved to Bilthoven, which is in the province of North Holland. In 1940, on May 10th, when the Germans invaded Holland and the Dutch capitulated on the 14th, life was not as drastically changed for the Jews, but little by little, all our freedoms were taken away. We could not practice professions. Lawyers couldn't be lawyers, doctors couldn't be doctors, children could not go to public school. We were lower than dogs or cockroaches, so we were not allowed in public places or parks. We couldn't shop for groceries or for necessary things except for very prescribed hours during the day. But by that time, all the goods would be gone virtually. And at that time, things became extremely bad and dangerous for Jews. We either had to go into hiding or be picked up in what were called razzias, the raids. There was a theater in Amsterdam, so when the Germans raided, Jews were gathered and sent to this theater, and children were placed in what was called a creche across the street. And there are many, many stories about what happened in these two places. But the Dutch underground was extremely active, and proportionately there were, if you keep in mind that Holland was such a small country, there were more what is called righteous among the nations, or righteous Christians, than in a lot of other countries. We were going on a percentage basis, not in numbers. And at the same time, there were a tremendous number of collaborators known as NSB'ers who were very sympathetic to all things German and were more than eager to work with the Germans. For a small country, it was a dichotomy, and there was a lot going on, and with the help of the underground, which may be more commonly known as the resistance, 2 hiding places were found. I mean, I went into one short hiding place, which I know nothing about, and then the Van de Brink family was found, and we stayed together for the duration of the war. There are books written about what motivated the righteous Christians in Holland. This family was Catholic, and they had a very strong idea of humility and doing the right thing. And for them, it wasn't very complicated. That is the only way that the 2 people I came to call Mama and Papa, and they were Mama and Papa van de Brink, looked at the world. It was the only right thing for them to do, and they were in total disregard of any danger it would pose to them and 8 of their children. And it posed, I mean, to say great danger is such an understatement. They were all risking their lives to place even one little person like me for whatever length of time I ended up being there. So imagine if they did the right thing. They had no idea if it would be a week or a month or 6 months, and it ended up being from 1942 until well into 1945, May 4th.
Thank you all for sharing this moment with us. as we make space to truly listen to our honored guest, Renée Fink. Renée's story is one that needs to be heard, not just with our ears, but with our hearts. By being here today, you become the kind of audience that carries those stories forward into your daily lives. And for that, we are so grateful for you. When I first spoke to Renée, I was struck by her passion for Jewish education and Holocaust and commitment to helping others understand the human experience behind statistics. Renée, thank you for being us here today and for your courage in sharing your story. As we go through this conversation, I welcome you to share any question you have in the chat, and we'll also have some time later for quick Q&A. Thank you, Renée. To begin, oh, go ahead.
No, I just want to thank you, Tzlil, and the North Carolina Council of Churches for inviting me and giving me the honor to be here with you. I do feel very honored. So I say hi, dignitaries and friends.
To begin, I'd like to ask you, you remained silent about your story for decades. What led you to finally speak out?
Oh, that is a loaded question. I am a child survivor. So when the war was over, I stayed with the Catholic family. I felt myself a member of the family. And I was 8.5 years old. When I was reunited with my grandmother and briefly with my aunt, we three were the only survivors of our families. Maybe some distant cousins had come from Germany to the United States in the 30s, namely one physician cousin, and maybe another cousin or two. But my family was murdered entirely. I never knew grandparents except for my dear beloved. And you would all have liked my grandmother so much. She survived the First World War and the Second. She lost 2 of her 3 children, and she was a role model throughout. Anyway, I did not know that I had an unusual childhood because to a young child, my daily life seemed perfectly normal. I had not known another life. After the war, I never stopped missing my parents. So after the war, when I began asking my grandmother and my aunt when my parents were coming back, because I lived for that day, there were no answers. So in a period of time, I sensed that this was a topic I should not introduce. And I stopped asking. I am really angry with my aunt, who told one of my children much later in life that I had a problem because I didn't talk about the war. Children sense when their questions are not welcome. So I knew nothing about my parents. I knew nothing about the war. I made a very fortunate marriage, and my husband wanted to protect me from Shoah and all things war-related. And until a certain time in my life, I was in denial and all this worked. But at some point in 1991, I think we were all in our 50s at that point, meaning all of us child survivors, hidden children. And there was a group in New York. They formed an organization, the Hidden Child Association, and they made public the fact that they were holding a meeting in New York City in a very large Marriott hotel. And I found myself there shaking because I didn't know there were other people and that we had a designated name or descriptive term for all of us. 1,600 hidden children appeared from all over the world. So at that point, I knew that I had a term by which I was referred, and that there were other people. And it was the most amazing experience in my life, and it turned my life upside down. And we were also given the task, I don't think there was room to refuse, that as the last living generation to bear witness to Shoah, we had a huge responsibility, and that was to speak. I was painfully shy, and I am, whether you understand or not, to this day I'm painfully shy. But I've learned to speak about this, and this is one area where I have learned to speak out, and it makes a very horrid, horrendous, meaningless piece of history into something I can do something constructive about. So if you thank me for appearing here, it has also given my life meaning to turn this into a constructive act.
And we're really, really, really thankful for that. What was it like to settle in America, especially in North Carolina? And did you experience anti-Semitism when you came here?
Well, when I came not to North Carolina until I was in my older age, and I lived in New York in the mountains. I lived in New York City, and we lived also in New Jersey, where we brought up our children. So when I came to America as a 10-and-a-half-year-old, I went to live with some cousin of my mother in the mountains, and the town was so small, they never saw a Jew. Before, they had never, they were rather isolated in the mountains, and they were tripping over each other and being kind to me because this little foreign girl was coming to join their ranks. And it was a very positive experience, which I think is not typical of the larger population in less isolated communities. I may not have been so welcomed. I would have represented the other. I'm an immigrant. Can I be sent back? It was a wonderful experience, but not the part where I had to call home, that part which I had to consider home. It didn't work out so well, and they had the best intentions and generosity. The child who was theirs didn't agree with all these ideas of having a new sister. So it went from bad to worse, and I couldn't be returned. So we were stuck with each other, and I can only praise them. They did everything they could. They fed me, they clothed me. I went to school there. Then periodically I ran away. I knew all the Trailways bus drivers, and I often went to New York, where I had my aunt, my mother's sister, who was the other survivor of our threesome, had married, and she was a newlywed. They had no money as immigrants. They were without apartment space to house me or anything. So I just ran back and forth. But I was not aware so much even of being Jewish. So I don't know what anti-Semitism might have looked like. I think I was a very ignorant, naive child. And whatever horrors the war created were part of my normal daily life, because as a 4-year-old, you don't really have vivid memories of a previous life, of the earlier years. And that's all I knew. So I always spoke about myself as one of the lucky ones. And when we came together in Manhattan at that huge conference in 1991, many of these hidden children seemed to echo. We seemed to have universal themes, that we were the lucky ones because we were guilt-ridden about our families and being survivors, and survivor's guilt was worse even than the war. And it's very difficult to describe, but you have more questions.
Thank you for sharing that. I know you always speak about your grandmother with such a beam in your face. What was it like to reunite with her after the war?
Well, first, I didn't want to leave the fun to breaks because I had 8 sisters and brothers, and not the mother. She died in one of the worst days of bombing in the midst of the war. I loved Papa and my brothers and sisters, and I didn't want to leave them. But I worshipped and adored my grandmother throughout my life. She was a star wherever she went. Her husband died prematurely. People died in those years. There were no antibiotics. There was no advanced medicine. And even his brother couldn't save his life in his own private clinic. So my grandmother had to find her way to feeding and caring for 3 children during the mega inflation in Germany. And you had to live by pure cleverness to survive that, because those were the days literally of bringing a wheelbarrow of money to buy a loaf of bread. She learned the language of the country wherever she moved, first Dutch from German, then English when she finally came here. She knew literature. She would sit after reading a book and actually think about it. We are darting from one accelerated activity to the next. I don't stop and think about things. It's like you're on a treadmill. I admire my grandmother for being able to give up whatever she needed to give up, never a complaint, never any sort of complaint. But if you asked her how she was, she laughed and she said, much better. So she was never sick. But it made you wonder how miserable she might have been the day before. But each day she was much better than the previous day. So she was the ultimate role model.
So special. Well, we ran a little bit of time and there's so many questions. I want to jump to the present. Given the rise of anti-Semitism today, do you see any similarity to what you experience?
This is my anxiety. This is my fear. I find that I am living with great fear because I can only speak for myself. This is not an accusation. This is with full respect for all ways of looking at the current state of our union. I'm very frightened, and I see a great repetition, but in a much more accelerated version. We are talking about anti-Semitism, but today we have to talk about immigrants, the other. This country must welcome people who are not Western white Christians. There is space for many more people. And what hurts so much is that people are self-deporting. I read that yesterday in the newspaper, so that they can go without the indignities of what is being done to groups of immigrants. I am very anxious and afraid, and I'm not a easily frightened kind of person. And sad, so sad. I think I am losing my dream of everything this country has meant over all the years of its history. So that's the big fight, to keep it free. But it's my feeling, my reaction.
And what actually give you hope in the fight against rising anti-Semitism?
Well, we've always had anti-Semitism. It has never been absent from anywhere in the world, and America was rife with it. I have just done the painful act of rewatching The United States and the Holocaust, Ken Burns and a few other amazing people creating this lengthy documentary on PBS or for PBS. It's very painful. And hope is that we always seem to come through it. And it's all we have, hope. So in order to keep this hope alive, I feel very strongly that we have to unite. Our Congress, both sides of the aisle, should find strength in uniting if they don't like what is happening at the highest level. Instead of fighting each other, there would be so much strength, and they would be able to lose some of their fear. So I'm very, very passionate about this uniting. We must stand up. We must make our voices heard. We must fight to to keep our democracy and our freedom, which has made America so great over all the years. And I feel that we must all, every one of us, must feel or be able to feel safe in our lives, wherever we live. And we must find ways to accomplish this together. So what Nechama is doing, the Tikkun Olam, everything the churches are doing, I thank you all, because we have to put our words into deeds. And I just think today, as we observe the 80th anniversary of Erev Yom HaShoah, the eve of Holocaust Remembrance Day, when Jews were freed from government-sponsored extinction. And I want to be more specific. There were 1.5 million children who were murdered during the Holocaust. Not exactly, probably more, but at least 1.5 million. Only 6 to 7% of children survived the Holocaust. That I'm here is an absolute miracle of courage and speaking out of namely my parents to give me away. Imagine giving up your only child. Of the Dutch underground, the resistance, of which my aunt and uncle were a part, and my uncle was brutally murdered after being jailed, and the Van der Brinks to put every one of their lives at risk. So we remember, this is Erev Yom HaShoah, and it's also the 250th anniversary of when this nation was fighting for its birth as a free republic. Therefore, these two events have a commonality of fighting for freedom, to be free, to live in democracy. Wouldn't it have been terrific if we could have stopped the clock some years ago and to continue to enjoy these freedoms, which a lot of Americans have always had? And I think we can't take them for granted anymore. And it would have been terrific to stop the clock because we are here again fighting for freedom.
Thank you, Renée. We have a few questions in the chat that I want to bring up. Gail is very curious if you remember how you left your parents at a young age, and maybe you can also describe us the moment you were placed in hiding, if you remember.
Well, the big thing is that it was another generation. It was very many generations ago. Parents didn't credit children with knowledge or intuition. But my parents, I think, were very progressive and very wonderful in all these ways. But it was a time when we couldn't talk. So my parents, I cannot imagine how it was for them, the ultimate act of love, to put me on the back of a stranger's bicycle, act quite casual. I wouldn't say nonchalant, but I certainly did not intuit or pick up anything, and said goodbye. And without, there was no explanation to that fact that this was going to happen tomorrow or that it was happening in a few minutes. It was just all done. Then I didn't know how long I stayed on this bicycle, but I was a well-behaved child. And then I was dropped off at what seemed to be a large house with a lot of very large, well, there was nobody in it that I remember, maybe the mother. But I spent the day there not knowing what I was doing there. And then one by one, very large people entered the house, my 5 new brothers. And there were 3 sisters. And no one explained anything to me. And I had no idea why I was there. So it took some time for me to adapt. But children are very adaptable and flexible. And I learned, I got my tongue back and then I got my appetite back. And life, little by little, although I was so painfully homesick, normalized in a whole new way.
Incredible. I'm really curious to know how did your faith or spirituality play a role during those difficult years? And what do you do to trust humanity again?
Very big questions. I think everyone has to find trust in others. For Holocaust survivors, it's not so easy. We have to learn to trust people one at a time. We may jump to some hasty conclusions. And I learned that I had to do that because there were people of both frames of thinking, the collaborators and the sympathizers. Holland was so full of both. And the other part, so that's trust. But the other part of your question that came first was?
And how is your faith? How
My
did your
faith.
faith or spirituality?
Okay, that's a difficult one to talk today in front of all you wonderful members of the North Carolina Council of Churches. I didn't know I was Jewish. My parents were German Jews. And you may realize that in Germany, Jews were very much assimilated within the society. They had the opportunity to be educated and to enter the professions, and that it wasn't a life like in Poland and Russia, where the Jews were relegated to shtetls and had a terrible life. So we lived a very comfortable middle-class life. And they were no doubt very Jewish and went to shul or services, but I don't know whether they went weekly. I doubt it. I hate to say we had lobster service, and that is not a kosher food, lobster. It is treif. So there were many lobster napkins and sterling silver lobster picks. It was very elaborate. So in Holland, to be born in 1937, your parents surely wouldn't say that you were Jewish. So I had no knowledge of it. And yet I had no knowledge of Catholicism, but I was a very good Catholic. I crossed myself throughout the day. I dipped my hands in the holy water on the doorpost of my bedroom, crossed myself, said the rosary, and I found also that most all hidden children tended to be very obedient and good. Some part of us knew that that was not our first home, and that we had to behave because many children found themselves out on the street. My family was heroic. They didn't save my life for money. Mostly it was done for money. And if the money ran out and the source of it ran out, because people didn't stay in the same place and it was complicated, then children were thrown out. But with me, it had nothing to do with exchanging monies. It was out of the pureness and goodness. So I was very Catholic. And when after the war, long after the war was over in May, my grandmother was able to have a place for us to live together. So then I joined her. And I told her immediately that we have to go to Mass every morning at 6 o'clock. And my grandmother, being very progressive in her thinking, said, "That's fine, but not at 6 in the morning." It was too early. And I inherited not being a morning person. So I didn't know anything about being Jewish, but one day my grandmother sent me to a Hebrew teacher. And I came home not understanding why I had to learn this alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet. But all I knew was that the woman was very old and very wrinkled and very used up from surviving the war. And I came home and told my grandmother, in Dutch, of course, I can never go back and see that old prune again. So I never had another Hebrew lesson. I never learned anything about being Jewish, of where I lived in the mountains in New York State. And when I went to college, I decided that I would go to services for the High Holy Days. And I was very self-conscious because I knew in Catholicism you had to wear a hat, and I didn't know if you had to wear a veil, and if my arms needed to be covered, and when to sit down and when to stand up. So that was my introduction to Judaism. It was very self-conscious. And I was fiercely Jewish even before that. Some part of me understood that I had lived, and it was not to give Hitler that last victory that I would be Jewish. And interestingly, when my daughter gave birth to twins, my Hungarian Christian friend said, "Good for her. That will show them." I have been very ethnically Jewish. I embrace my Judaism. And I'm proud of it.
Thank you, Renée. We are running a little bit out of time, but I wanted to thank you so much for your inspiration and for sharing with us so authentically your story and giving us the courage to also stand up for hate and continue this important conversation even after this call. I will pass it to my colleague Max Thank you so much again for being with us
I
today.
thank you all, every last person.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Renée. That was really powerful and very hard to follow. We so appreciate you sort of sharing your story. Yom HaShoah is different than International Holocaust Remembrance Day. This sort of secular holiday marks the liberation of Auschwitz. Yom HaShoah is tied very directly to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising and sort of Jews taking action and putting their faith in their own hands. Murak Edelman, who is a survivor of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, a very interesting person and sort of very famously cranky. So I relate to that as well. Once refused to go to a commemoration of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising because it only focused on the fight. He said, "We fought not only for our lives, but we fought for life in dignity and freedom." When Nechama does its work, we sort of center those same principles. We're not just here to help people and assist people. We are here, as Stefan said earlier, to assist people and bring comfort, to bring dignity back to them so people have their agency once again after a storm devastates them. So as we sort of think and reflect on this day that commemorates collective action and amazing people like Miss Renée, I really encourage all of you to get involved in these rebuilding efforts, rebuilding homes and lives, either with Nechama or other amazing NGOs on the ground as we continue to sort of rebuild and pick up the pieces post-Helene. Thank you again, Ms. Renée. Thank you so much, Sleal, for putting this all on. Now I believe I'm handing it over to the amazing Reverend Kelsey.
Thank you so much, Max and Renée. Thank you so much. It's a sacred privilege to get to be in this space with you, Renée, and with this community. I'd like to invite us to pray together. So let us pray. I invite you to welcome a deeper than normal breath. Eternal God, source of strength and comfort, we gather today to remember the victims of the Holocaust. We recall the darkness of those years, the unspeakable cruelty, and the loss of so many lives. As we remember, we also commit ourselves to building a world where such atrocities will never happen again. In the light of God, we see everyone as equally precious manifestations of the divine and can know the courage to face the darkness. We thank you, God, for Renée, her family, and so many others for their moral leadership then and now. Grant us the courage to stand against hatred, the wisdom to promote understanding, and the compassion to heal the wounds of the past. Continue to inspire us to create a future of peace and justice that respects and honors the dignity of every person and every part of creation. Through our prayers and actions, help us to stand together with those who are suffering so that love will prevail over hate and good will triumph over evil. God, give us a tough-minded hope and make us instruments of your compassion, mercy, and peace. Amen.
I'd like to thank everyone again on behalf of the North Carolina Council of Churches. This has been an incredible hour spent together. I know we are all changed in heart and mind. Again, thank you especially to Renée for sharing her lived experience and for all our presenters and friends at Nechama, and to all of you who have joined us today and all those who will view and share this recording. Please do. So as we move forward as a group, we are thankful for the reminders of compassion and empathy that have surfaced during our time together. May these virtues guide us in our interactions with others. We're grateful for the insights gained and the connections fostered. All of us at the North Carolina Council of Churches, thank you. All again, and may we move forward together, not one step back, in the spirit of strength through unity and peace through justice. Please stay safe and strong, and may we gather again soon. Be well.